See, when I have Peter, everything is all good. Thank you, Peter. Well, good evening again, everyone, and welcome to the 8th Annual Toner Prize celebration honoring the life and career of Robin Toner. A trailblazing journalist, Robin was the first female national political correspondent for the New York Times. Now, besides the 2018 Toner Prize, we will also award an honorable mention tonight. The work singled out this evening followed some basic patterns: a tip received over lunch and followed up on, a government program that sounded good but didn't quite work out as promised, powerful figures and their shady operatives trying to put up roadblocks for reporters to prevent them from finding the truth. It's the kind of reporting practiced by some of the Toner program's most vigorous supporters: the New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Politico, PBS, NPR, and I might add CNN as well. For those of you who I have not had a chance to meet today, my name is Renee Marsh. I'm with CNN. I'm a correspondent with CNN. I'm also a Newhouse alum. Newhouse, Ruth. I graduated from Newhouse in 2003. If many of you remember, that was the year that Carmelo Anthony brought home the victory. We didn't quite see a replay again this year. I'm still a little bitter. If you're from Duke, don't talk to me just yet. It's too soon. It's too soon. But we're talking about political journalism tonight. And as a female journalist and an alum of Newhouse, I'm incredibly honored to be a part of this evening's program, honoring such a giant in political journalism. To be a first at anything means that you're already pretty special. It means you've broken down barriers, stereotypes, and helped those who doubted you understand what you already knew: that you are more than capable. Not only did Robin Toner do all of those things, she turned around and she was absolutely the best at her job. That's why tonight's awards hold so much weight. The political journalism we have seen over the last year alone would have made Robin proud. As everyone in this room knows, journalism is critical to our democracy, and it's not a stretch to say it's critical to the well-being of our nation. It is not, as some may call it, fake news. So on that note, I say thank God for Dean of Syracuse University, the Newhouse School, my friend Lorraine Branham, who has been diligently training the next generation of powerhouse journalists. She's a former newspaper journalist herself. Dean Branham has spearheaded an $18 million fundraising campaign for the renovation of Newhouse 2 and the creation of the Newhouse Studio and Innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome to the stage Dean Lorraine Branham.
Thank you so much, Renee. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. This is always a special time for us at the Newhouse School because we get to come to Washington to see the cherry blossoms and present the Robin Toner Prize for Excellence in Political Reporting. I'm delighted that so many of you were able to come out tonight to support this award program and our honorees. You know, one of the reasons we created this award is because Robin often bemoaned the fact that there was no award for political reporting, and we wanted to rectify that. We believe journalists who cover politics are doing the people's work, as the framers envisioned. They are the ultimate watchdogs. We have only one award, but there's a lot of good work being done by news organizations across the country. It is always my hope that the Toner Prize and the light that it shines on political journalism and political reporting reflects well on all political journalists everywhere. and that all of you will serve as a role model for my students who seek to follow your example. Would you please give a round of applause for all of those in the political reporting trenches? You are all winners, and we all thank you. Now I'd like to introduce the 12th Chancellor and President of Syracuse University, Kent Syverud. Chancellor Syverud assumed this role in January 2014, bringing with him nearly 2 decades of academic leadership experience at premier national universities. He served most recently as Dean and the Ethan A. H. Shepley Distinguished University Professor of Law at Washington University in St. Louis. Prior to that, he served as Dean at Vanderbilt Law School and as Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the University of Michigan Law School. Chancellor Syverud holds a bachelor's degree from Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service and a law degree and a master's degree in economics from the University of Michigan. He counts among his many closest mentors retired U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, for whom he clerked shortly after she became the first woman named to the Supreme Court bench. Since becoming Chancellor, he has made his key priorities enhancing the undergraduate experience, empowering research excellence, embracing change and innovation, and positioning Syracuse as the best university in the world for veterans. Chancellor Syverud is accompanied tonight by his wife, Dr. Ruth Chen, an accomplished environmental toxicologist who is a professor of practice in the school's College of Engineering and Computer Science. Please join me in welcoming to the podium Chancellor Kent Syverud.
Thank you, Lorraine. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of Syracuse University, I thank you tonight for participating in the presentation of the Toner Prize for Excellence in Political Reporting. Robin Toner was a great journalist with dual degrees from Syracuse University. As a graduate of our Newhouse School of Communications and our Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs, she saw how political reporting could serve the public good and be a powerful tool in strengthening communities. Robin was lost all too young, but her ideals remain alive in the Toner Prize and in the passion of our students in Newhouse, who learn how to responsibly wield the power of the press. At Syracuse University, our vision is to prepare our students to become engaged citizens, scholars, and leaders in a rapidly changing global society. We are trying very hard to teach them the value of open discourse and the increasing need for diligence to find the actual facts and to speak the truth. With Robin's well-known passion for meticulous research and accuracy in reporting, we wonder that she might be a little disheartened today. But we think she would have had quite a compelling take on the infiltration and abuse of social media by foreign entities, for example. We think she would have supported extraordinarily the efforts of our keynote speaker to improve transparency in political advertising, to develop new technologies to battle fake news and altered video, and to strengthen cybersecurity. Senator Mark Warner has been vocal about the need to balance First Amendment rights with efforts to strengthen national security. He has acknowledged the public's right to know whether viewpoints are being expressed by foreign agents posing as Americans. He has asked the nation's tech giants to do more to strengthen cybersecurity and has continued to work across the political aisle on this issue, believing the nation is woefully unprepared for cyber threats. The Senate Intelligence Committee, of which Senator Warner is vice chair, is a bastion of bipartisanship in a city in desperate need of more of it. Syracuse University, like Newhouse and the Toner Program, take bipartisanship seriously and praise Senator Warner and Chair Senator Richard Burr's efforts at bipartisanship. Syracuse University also has invested heavily in new programs to train cybersecurity experts. We're proud to say that we've been ranked the #1 university in the country in cybersecurity for veterans and military-connected students. But tonight, the university wants to promise to all of you that we will continue to do our part to prepare the next generation of journalists, cybersecurity experts, and political leaders who will work alongside great leaders like Senator Warner to protect free press, free speech, and freedom of thought. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking and welcoming Senator Mark Warner.
Thank you, Chancellor Syverud. Thank you, Dean Branham. Thank you to Syracuse University, to the Newhouse School, and most specifically to the Toner Program. And thank you as well to Robin's family. I got a chance to meet almost all of them and get photo ops with all of them as well. I'm honored to actually have this opportunity tonight to speak to you about such an incredibly important topic. A free political press. A free political press that, frankly, we took for granted for most of our life, but now, maybe not so much. You know, there is, for those of you who are students or some of the winners just in, there's a lot of noise in this city that passes sometimes for important politics. There's a lot of noisy people who call themselves important politicians or pundits. Then there are some people who ply their crafts quietly, carefully, and sometimes unnoticed while they work. They actually don't say things that aren't true. They don't say anything until they've got a pretty good reason to think that something is true. And then when they do speak or write, they do so carefully, artfully, and oftentimes in an understated way. Nora and Jake, your mother was one of those people. Many of my Senate colleagues knew her and respected her for the same reasons that I did. Now, Robin was still human, like everybody else. Peter, her husband, told me, who was quite an organizer in himself. You ought to have seen us marching us back and forth between the photo op and getting us ready for this. But Peter, her husband, told me part of the backstory behind the Toner Prize. He said he'd done a lot of investigations, and there are a lot of prizes for investigative reporters, and he'd won some. Robin, as we all know, and I see many of our colleagues out here, did politics from start to finish. There were no prizes exclusively for political reporters. It was just assumed that great news organizations would field a great political team. They were and are the workhorses of American journalism, particularly in these times when Lord knows how many times a day Mike Allen files a different story. So Robin had won no prizes, but she was sure, and Peter said that she was absolutely right, that she was the better reporter and writer of the two of them. He said it quietly galled her. So after her death, many of you here tonight joined with Robin's family in establishing the Toner Program at Syracuse renowned Newhouse School. Peter and the organizers thought it would be righting a wrong to establish a prize in Robin's name, one for excellence in political reporting. Thus was birthed, my understanding, the Toner Prize. Its importance has only grown in the years since it was established. And whoever the winners are tonight, and I got a chance actually to meet some of them beforehand, they should be proud that they're being honored in the name of someone who so loved her craft, her colleagues, and her country. And it showed in her work. And in today's work, the work of professional journalism absolutely remains essential. I would argue that never before in human history have we had so much access to so many sources of information. The answer to virtually any question in the world is sitting right here in our phone, one swipe away. Yet, despite that, It seems like most Americans, and for that, folks, most people around the world, may be more confused than ever. And I would argue that no news story illustrates that more clearly than the subject that I never thought I would be spending this much time on: what the Russians chose to do in our 2016 elections. In 2016, the Russians took some of our nation's greatest strengths, the openness of our society and our technology, and in many ways turned them against us. But what the Russians did, I would argue, was far more insidious than just a propaganda effort to try to sway an election. They undermined, maybe permanently, and it will be up to us, many of us in this room, whether that is the case, our faith in civil discourse and in the democratic process. For very little cost, Russian agents set up thousands of fake accounts, groups, pages, and populated content on every social media site that you've ever heard of, and quite honestly, a lot of sites you've never heard of. Russian trolls spent literally months developing fake accounts with their own networks of actual real followers, and boosted those efforts with then paid advertising and automated bots. These accounts later utilized these networks that they built up sometimes for months in advance before they salted any kind of political content to push disinformation, including stolen emails, state-led propaganda, fake news, and at its heart, divisive content. Now, as somebody who came from that industry, came from the tech industry, and deeply respects that industry, and frankly has been involved still for a few more years in the tech business longer than I've been involved in politics, I'll admit it actually even took me some time to kind of fully get my arms around what was happening and come to grips with this threat. It took me a while, and I was kind of old school. I was a cell phone guy, and now we're in the internet world, to even fully get all the language and the mechanics, the difference between bots, trolls, and fake accounts, how they generate likes, tweets, shares, and how these players could be combined in this comprehensive online system. But I tell you, after now months, frankly, I guess almost more like a year and 2 months of investigations with the Senate Intelligence Committee, I've come to a recognition and realization that if a hostile intelligence organization had to go out and actually develop an ideal vehicle for information warfare from scratch, they may very willingly have built the kind of social media ecosystem that we all live in. Think about that for a moment. What has been revolutionary and brought enormous good in so many ways, we've also now seen that dark underbelly of this new network and mode of communications in ways that we could have never imagined. And so this proliferation of misinformation is beyond, I think, what most policymakers, and I would argue, frankly, what most of you in this room fully realize. And none of it has stopped with the election in 2016. And the national security threat that it poses is directed at the very heart of our democracy and our society. Now, this kind of threat of misinformation and disinformation isn't actually new. For those of us in this room that remember when the Berlin Wall was still standing, the prior organization to the Russians, the Soviet Union, tried a series of disinformation threats. I remember when they put forward the notion that somehow Martin Luther King was assassinated by the American government, or that the American military was the instigators behind the creation and spread of the AIDS epidemic. But back in those good old days, misinformation and disinformation was a lot harder. You might have to go out and actually set up a fake newspaper or spread rumors that at their best traveled very slowly across a community. Truth is, today, for pennies on the dollar, of what it would cost to spread misinformation and disinformation in the time when I was growing up, they can have that misinformation and disinformation appear on any news feed with virtually any topic on any of your devices in a way that we still haven't got our arms around. Matter of fact, and I say this as someone who comes from a heavily defense state and proud of the importance of defending our nation, but if you add up all of the cost of the Russian campaign with misinformation and disinformation in our elections in 2016, and then throw in as well what the Russians spent trying to spread misinformation and disinformation in the French election, where, by the way, Facebook took down 30,000 plus accounts. In America, they've only taken down 470 accounts. You take what they spent in France and America together and double it, you're talking about less than the cost of one new F-35 airplane. And in a nation where we're spending now, with this last budget, $700 billion on our nation's defense, and we see a country like Russia that spends $68 billion, our spend is 10x. I sometimes worry whether we are investing in the best 20th century military that money can buy, when much of the conflict in the 21st century may be in the realm of misinformation, disinformation, and cyber. And since it worked so well in 2016, hacked emails, fake accounts, cyber attacks, you can absolutely imagine they'll be back. And they'll be back with a whole raft of new technologies that would make fake accounts on a static web page look like yesterday's news. So what do we do? How do we combat that? Now, I've spent more than a year as the vice chair of the Intelligence Committee trying to figure that out. How do you prevent or deal with a massive disinformation campaign in a world where technology allows you to spread that information around the world in half a second? Now, to get that right, it's going to take a collaboration that, quite honestly, we don't see enough in this town. There's no Democrat or Republican solution to figuring this out. Policymakers alone can't figure this out. The United States government is going to need the involvement of the American people. We're candidly going to need the involvement of journalists. We're going to need the active participation of the technology companies in ways that we haven't been very good at in recent years. Unfortunately, I would argue that part of this effort is suffering in part because of lack of leadership from the top. When we have a president who, even with the actions today of expunging or expelling certain diplomats, is unwilling to call out the Russian threat or name the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, who is behind part of this effort, we don't have the concentrated whole of government, and for that matter, whole of society effort we need. The truth is, President Trump should stop actively delegitimizing American journalism and, frankly, address head-on the real threat posed by Russian media, which is the real fake news. I also think, and this has gotten me in trouble with some of my friends in the Valley, that the major platform companies, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, YouTube, Tumblr, aren't doing nearly enough to prevent their platforms from becoming, frankly, petri dishes for the next level of Russian disinformation. Now, I think they're slowly waking up to the threat. But as the evidence of last week has shown, when companies like Facebook still don't have a plan to protect the personal information of Americans and their data from being utilized by foreign actors in a campaign in ways that most Americans never had any idea, that simply friending someone that took a Cambridge Analytica survey might mean that your personal data ended up being used in the Trump campaign, and their reluctance to acknowledge their role in that, I have to tell you, as someone who's a supporter of the tech industry, that's just not going to cut it in 2018. So I celebrate the success of Facebook and Twitter and Google. They are American icons. And they have created enormous value in ways that when I think even their founders started, probably they couldn't fully anticipate. But the notion that these companies have grown from kind of dorm room startups to now being the most powerful countries in our country, and in some cases in the world, with that power comes a level of responsibility that they have to step up and acknowledge to try to get things right. Now, I don't pretend to have all of the solutions by any means, but we do know that they have to work with us. And believe you me, you leave Congress on its own with technology, chances are we're going to screw it up. I know that's a shocking newsflash to the journalists in this room. But if we really value civil discourse, if we really value fair elections, they have to step up, because you can't just treat this like it's a Russian problem. Because the truth is, what the Russians did in 2016, that playbook and the value on ruble invested is now available to other adversaries, whether they be nation states, hacksters, or foreign entities of any stripe. And they will be back. That's why I'm so flabbergasted to see that some of the CEOs of some of these companies are willing to answer to their shareholders, but not been willing to come out and address the American public. And we need these CEOs to come to this town, not just to address Congress, but to explain themselves to the American public. And the sooner it happens, the better. The truth is, and actually there's, this isn't the first time this kind of stuff happened. We were thinking back, you know, the original fake news, and I won't point out that Dan may be the only person in the room that will remember this, actually took place back in 1938. When Orson Welles went on the radio and did the War of the Worlds. Think about it. At that point, there was this brand new technology, transistor radios. And there were no rules that said what is the responsibility of a broadcaster in terms of the content that went over this new wireless communications form. Well, in the aftermath of the fear that struck, there was a debate about responsibility in on the public airwaves. And I think very few TV or radio owners today, no matter what their stripe, would acknowledge that 80 years later that they are better served, and we are better served, by having rules of the road, at least to acknowledge the source of the content, the identity of the content, particularly when it comes to political content. The truth is, I think we're going to need some of those same common sense rules and regulations as we think about platform companies, as we think about social media. And the challenge, though, will be political advertising in and of itself will not be enough, because most of the activities that are called Russian active measures were not simply paid political ads, but they were this creation of this false identity around a topic oftentimes that had nothing to do with politics, and then seducing you in, use that topic and use that area, whether it was Alabama football or Texas succession, to draw people in, create followers, and then populate that account with false information. And if you think that was bad, think about what will happen come this year and then in 2020, because we're still trying to get our arms around how you deal with a fake account. What happens when we deal with the next wave of technology, which is called deep fake, where you put the politician's face, where you put Marty's face on Dan's body? I would let that one sink in for a moment for those of you who are the journalists in the room. Or, for that matter, anybody that's had any kind of public disclosure, if you got more than 20 hours of video, we can make any word you want come out of Mike Allen's mouth at this point. Now, we'll say that in jest, but those technologies will be a reality come 2018, come 2020. What happens when an elected official 48 hours out appears on your news feed appearing to say outrageous, ridiculous things, and assuming it's not the president saying these kind of things, and how do you react to that? Where will be the veracity? How will we get this right? So if one thing that it's going to require accountability. And that's one thing that every journalist in this room understands. After all, yours is one of the few professions on earth where your name is still attached to everything you do. When you don't get it right, you got to end up with a correction right there in black and white. And let's face it, in these days, accountability is hard to come by. The truth is, with the Russians posing as Americans trying to sow discord and fuel division, with news increasingly filtered not based upon your preference but by a particular algorithm, having reliable arbiters of the truth, I think will be more important than ever in terms of an essential health of our democracy. Now again, I don't have all the answers by any means, but I do know that the rising generation of journalists can contribute to solving these problems. And we have to hew the truth and follow the lead of Robin's beloved New York Times to report the news without fear or favor. That's why this Toner Prize is so important. So tonight, for all the winners, I say congratulations. To all the members of Robin's family who are here, thank you for letting me take a picture of you guys with you. To Robin and Jake, and for having the brilliance to kind of have twins that chose both Brown and University of Chicago as schools. What a great combination. Thank you all for allowing them to be here, and stay true to your task. We've got a lot of work to do in front of us. Thank you all very much.
Senator Warner, I'm still thinking about that deep face thing, somebody's head on someone else's body. I don't know. All right, so we have reached the portion of the evening that you all came here for, which is the awards portion. Again, as you all know, the prestigious Toner Prize is for excellence in political journalism. It's in its 8 short years, the Toner Prize has become the most prestigious in American political journalism, thanks in no small measure to the New York Times, Robin's home newspaper, whose senior editors helped family and friends start the Toner program, and whose publisher, Arthur Sulzberger Jr., generously supported. At this point, we're going to call on the judge, one of the judges for tonight, the finalist judge, onto the stage. He's going to tell us a little bit more about the Toner Prize and all that went into picking tonight's winners. So without further ado, we'll have Adam Clymer come on up on stage.
Thank you. My job in this operation for the last few years has been to be a judge. And I've gotten to read some terrific journalism. This year it was different in a way. There were, of the 13 finalists who we got to judge, only 2 of those articles were written by a single person. And then the winners, as I think you've read from the program, they're not 1 or 2 people or 3, there's 7 of them. And while teamwork was always important in the news business, this is probably a greater level of it than we were ever used to. Obviously, the striking thing about many of the entries this year was the multimedia approach. Not just pictures necessarily, but but moving images of the border, a story about the wall, and this is all well and good. There's one problem with the writing for the internet rather than for the dead tree editions. And that is, it seems like space is infinite. And it may sometimes relieve reporters of the need to decide what's important and what isn't. You can just empty your notebook into a story. But by and large, and that's not the case of the pieces we saw, or probably of a good many ones that didn't get to us either because they were beaten in a preliminary round by one of the ones that did. At any rate, it's been a pleasure to honor Robin's memory by judging these contests, and I'm sure she would have been annoyed if she hadn't won.
Hi. I have the pleasure of presenting this year's honorable mention on behalf of my mom. This year's honorable mention goes to an investigation which began over a year ago with some of the messiest government data you could ever imagine. Our winners, 2 reporters at the Arizona Republic, were working on a piece about Arizona's school choice system. Their work hinged on access to a full accounting of the system. They received that accounting on the eve of a vote to expand the program tenfold. In our reporter's own words, the data provided was, quote, opaque, incomplete, and riddled with errors. Faced with such data, our reporters got to work. They eventually found that Arizona school choice not only disproportionately benefited wealthy students, but that it had a lack of oversight which bordered on willful negligence. They pursued the story despite hostility at the state and local levels, with the school superintendent at one point disparaging their work as, quote, fake news from a failing news organization. There are countless reasons that these reporters deserve this honor, but in the interest of time, I will highlight only 2. The first is that our winners had the foresight to bring a national debate to the local stage. My mom once wrote in an obituary for her dear friend and colleague, David Rosenbaum, that in every piece he sought the, quote, real people getting something or getting something taken away. School choice has been, and will continue to be, a contentious debate on the national stage. But our reporters understood that what matters most is how it affects real people in real places all across this country. The second is that our reporters' work brought about concrete, measurable change. Although the Arizona legislature ended up passing the school choice expansion, a grassroots organization formed in opposition, collecting 100,000 signatures and eventually halting the law's enactment pending a referendum ballot next year. The organization's leaders credited the Republic's work as the impetus for their movement. At a time when it's so easy for our political leaders to dismiss coverage as fake and news organizations as failing, it's tough for reporting to have such an impact on the world around us. That these reporters were able to is a testament to their tenacity and their drive. So it is an honor for me to present this year's Toner Prize honorable mention to Yvonne Winget Sanchez and Rob Odell of the Arizona Republic. I welcome them to the stage.
So thank you so much to Nora and Jake and the Toner family. I'm Rob Odell from the Arizona Republic. This is Yvonne Winget Sanchez. I'm also a 2001 graduate of Syracuse University. So Charlotte Grimes, who's sort of the authority of on these things, told me that I was the first person from Syracuse to be honored by the Toner Prize. So this is a great honor for me anyway, but it's even bigger that it's from Syracuse. I didn't know Robin personally, unfortunately, but I couldn't think of a better way for a reporter to be honored than an award that champions important work that holds the powerful accountable. Arizona has consistently expanded a program allowing parents to take taxpayer money and take that taxpayer money and put it towards private school, a voucher of sorts. Arizona politicians were dead set on expanding this program so it could be available for every student. And we're essentially the laboratory for the Koch brothers and Betsy DeVos and the Goldwater Institute. So, like Jacob said, this had been going on for more than a year, and we had authored numerous stories detailing that the fraud that had trailed this program, and also we had statistically proven that it was benefiting wealthier students rather than poor students. But this sort of didn't matter. The legislature was going to expand this program no matter what. And so we had fought for 2 years to get an idea of who was benefiting from this program, who was getting the $50 million of taxpayer money. And so after fighting for 2 years, we had gotten this data during a vote on expanding the program tenfold. And so, we were obviously pretty upset about this because we wanted to get this information to voters and politicians before they voted. And, our editor said, well, they gave you it in the middle of the vote. Can you turn around and write the story on deadline? Hopefully you can get it out while they're still debating. And that's what we did. We left we left the vote, and we tried to write the story before they voted, and we couldn't do it. And I just remember feeling so demoralized that, they had taken this vote and we had not gotten this data to them. And, but I imagine, like Robin would have done, we didn't quit. The next day, we published a story showing that the state essentially couldn't say what schools were benefiting. And like Jacob said, the Arizona Superintendent of Schools called our story "Fake News from a Failing News Organization." But we wrote another story that showed how everything that she had said was wrong. And when I hear Robin described, I often think of my partner on the story, Yvonne. And I wanted to tell a little story about her. So we had been pulling these long days, and we had been carpooling, and I had dropped her off, and she had said, I got this tip that there's going to be a ballot measure to challenge this thing, and I can figure out who's doing it. I don't know who's doing it, but I'm going to figure it out. So I thought, great, this is a great story for the end of this week or next week. Yvonne went home, put her 3 kids to bed, figured out who had done it between 8 and 11 o'clock at night, emailed me the next morning and said, I figured it out at 7:45. And what I was trying to figure out was, what am I going to tell Yvonne that I was doing for the last 12 hours? So this is why she's such a great partner to work with. And here's Yvonne Winget-Sanchez.
Rob was busy with his 2 kids. That's what he was doing. Thank you so much to Robin's family and to Syracuse University for this award. It really is an honor. As Rob said, Arizonans really didn't know much about the Empowerment Scholarship Account Program, the school voucher type program in Arizona, before our reporting. They didn't know what the total cost was. They didn't know where the money was being spent at, Catholic schools, Christian schools, private schools. They didn't know who was benefiting from the program. And there are still a lot of unanswered questions with this program, and there are questions that we are still trying to answer. The program is being replicated across the country by powerful special interests who are using Arizona's program as a model as lawmakers try to advance it in states across the U.S. But because of our reporting, Arizonans are now aware of the lax oversight. They know that the program is not, in fact, benefiting just the vulnerable students who were used as examples of why the program was needed in the first place. The public actually paid attention to our reporting, and they responded. In November, voters are poised to vote on a referendum. They will decide if they want to keep the legislature's proposal and legislation to actually extend this program to all 1.1 million public school children, or if they want to do away with it. And because of our reporting and Rob Odell's wonderful data crunching, they will actually make an informed vote. I think our reporting really exemplifies what Robin's work stood for: connecting politics and power to the democratic process and giving voters a better understanding of the priorities and the values of the people who represent them at the State House. I want to give special thanks to our editors who also pulled long nights, even though they have small kids. Michael Squires, Josh Susong, and Nicole Carroll. They stood by us even as we were lambasted many times by the state's most powerful politicians as being fake news reporters. They kept publishing the stories and they fought for the data. Thank you again to the judges and to Robin's family and to the winners. It really is an honor.
Hi. In addition to the honorable mention, the Newhouse School and the Toner program have decided to include an additional segment tonight. Here to explain why is my father, Peter Gosselin.
I'm just pinch hitting. Dean Branham has been sick with the flu, and she probably shouldn't have come down in the first place. But in any case, so I'm just think of me as her. Journalism is a deadline business. We usually are focused on the present. That's why the Toner Prize for Excellence in Political Reporting focuses on stories that have been reported in the previous year and presented now. But sometimes you've got to take a longer view beyond the single year. Sometimes it's important to recognize significant journalism that's sustained and ongoing even as we're gathered here tonight. The Newhouse School and the advisory board of the Toner program decided that it was important to take a moment to take that longer view, to celebrate sustained scrutiny of a dangerous threat to the U.S. electoral system. This coverage was not entered for this year's Toner Prize contest, the winner of which will be announced shortly. We're making these special awards outside of and separate from the Toner Prize to two organizations for their ongoing coverage of Russian efforts to corrupt the American elections. Both news organizations have devoted thousands of hours and extraordinary reporting talent to illuminate Russia's actions during the 2016 election. Both have pursued the ongoing investigation by Special Counsel Robert Muller into the Russian hacking and links to the Trump campaign. The first is the New York Times, and I invite New York Times Washington Bureau Chief Elizabeth Buemiller up to the stage. Hi, my dear. we meet again.
How are you? Okay. Thank you, Peter, and Nora, and Jake. It's just a great honor to be recognized tonight by the Toner program and Syracuse and Robin's family, particularly because the kind of journalism that we've done, the kind of in-depth, relentless, and careful journalism is the kind of journalism that Robin admired and, of course, practiced herself. There are a lot of people here tonight I want to recognize. The first is Mark Mazzetti. He's right here. He's our Washington investigations editor. At least he was until he went back to reporting and went back to the light side. We also have with us Maggie Haberman. Where'd Maggie go? Well, she was here. Oh, there she is. Sharon Lafreniere's here, and Nick Fandos. I also want to recognize Mike Schmidt, Matt Apuzzo, Adam Goldman, Matt Rosenberg, Joe Becker. It's the kind of collaborative journalism that really works. I also want to recognize, of course, in my opinion, the best executive editor in the business, Dean Baquet, and along with the Deputy Managing Editor, Matt Purdy. It's just been an extraordinary team effort in the last 18 months or so. As the White House has, we faced a big number of challenges like the Washington Post, a secretive White House that tries to dismiss everything we've written as fake news, an ongoing federal investigation involving highly classified information, and looming threats to throw sources in jail. But it's the kind of reporting that the New York Times and the Washington Post need to be doing in this current era. More than that, the Russia story is not just a demanding, deeply competitive, relentless story. It's one of the most important stories I've ever been involved with. And it goes to, as Mark Warner said, the heart of our democracy, and it raises the big question of whether or not the United States will respond to an attack on our democratic institutions. So I just want to applaud, thank you very much, and I want to applaud my colleagues especially.
Our deepest congratulations, both from the Newhouse School and the Toner Program, to the New York Times. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Bill Kovich. Bill has played just about every position in journalism. He was the Washington bureau chief of the New York Times. He was the editor of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He was the co-author of Elements of Journalism, which we all had to read, and which was good to read. Most importantly, he's a member of the Toner Advisory Board, and he has been a treasured member, and he's here to offer the next special recognition. Bill.
Before I say anything else, I just want to mention that with a wife, a daughter, and 3 daughters who are school teachers, I think this was a magnificent award to the Arizona Republic for the work they did about the way public education is handled in some of our states. Congratulations to you, everyone. When it comes to big stories, journalists compete aggressively. And as a former Washington bureau chief of the New York Times, I can assure you that that competition between the Times and the next recipient of recognition has been especially fierce. The rivalry between the two papers has enriched our understanding of American politics generally, but most recently, of the Russian interference with the U.S. electoral process. To borrow a phrase from the recipient of this award, democracy dies in darkness. This recipient, the Washington Post, whose reporters revealed President Obama's secret efforts to punish the Russians for their interference with our elections, and his agonized struggle over whether or not to disclose this information in the middle of a heated presidential campaign between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. The Post has contributed not only to this coverage, but to bring us daily reports of Mueller's special investigation. And yes, I'm anticipating reality, but I shouldn't do that. That's not a journalist's role. And the fact checker in the Washington Post, who continues every day to inform us of what is accurate and what is not on the tweets that pour out of the White House every day. When it comes to big stories, journalists, whoops, I started over again. I'm sorry. I can't extemporize, I have to read. I apologize. At a time when the whole idea of fact-based journalism is under assault, it's important that this work of special recognition is applied this evening. On behalf of the Toner Program Advisory Board and the Newhouse School, I'm delighted to present special recognition to the Washington Post, and accepting it on behalf of the Post is the paper's Deputy Editor, Lori Montgomery. Lori? You have to. Where is the Where's the award?
Thank you very much.
No, it's accepting on behalf of the Post will be Ellen Nakashima, one of our lead reporters on the Russia investigation.
Thank you so much, Bill, for that kind and generous introduction. A little bit of fake news, but no.
Excuse me.
Wonderful. It's truly an honor to be here accepting this award on behalf of myself and my colleagues at the Washington Post. And I'd like to thank the Toner family, the Syracuse University, and the Newhouse School for this award this evening. It's also quite an honor to be up here accepting this award alongside our colleagues at the New York Times, with whom we have shared a quite an invigorating year and a half of competition. It's important to validate the vital role that journalism plays at a time when our country seems so divided and the stakes seem so high. There's a lot of people who seem to want a specific outcome. But as Bill alluded to, we as journalists don't see it that way. We're focused at getting at the facts, putting them in context, and telling the truth as best as we can ascertain it. These are a set of facts that powerful people may not want the world to hear, but it's our job to try to ferret them out and to do so fairly. We've often been cast as the opposition, the fake media at war with the Trump administration. But I think our executive editor, Marty Barron, put it best. We're not at war with the administration, we're at work. Marty. So over the last year and a half, really even back into 2016, I think the work the Washington Post has done has truly been a team effort. It encompassed at least 15, maybe 20 reporters. Some of them are here tonight. My brilliant and invaluable colleagues, Roz Helderman, Phil Rucker, Carol Lenig. Please, give a hand. And some who helped launch this coverage in 2016, Tom Hamburger, Greg Miller, Adam Entus, are not. We also could not have accomplished such a body of work without our editors, including Lori Montgomery, who is here tonight, and at the risk of sounding like an Oscar Awards winner, the other editors, Steve Ginsburg, Peter Finn, Peter Walston, Matteo Gold, Dan Egan, but especially our fearless executive editor, Marty Barron, who's Marty, whose steady hand has guided this ship through often treacherous reporting waters. Thank you for your support in helping us help the American people understand how Russia has tried to intervene in the election, and for helping us report the news without fear or favor. So thank you once again to the Toner family, the Toner program, and thank you all for this award.
Good evening, I'm Nora Gosselin. Okay. And I'm going to present the prize. It's a strange experience being told I'm my mother's daughter, one I've grown accustomed to over the past unbelievably 10 years. It's a compliment, it's a challenge, it's something I've struggled to make sense of as I've grown up. Most of all, it's anything but static. It meant one thing to me at age 11, 12, and 13, when I was navigating a range of new, awkward experiences with the help of some close friends, family, and the internet. It means something very different today to me at almost 21, living in a country full of hate and lies, where one's race or birthplace, gender, or sexual orientation determines whether they're allowed any semblance of justice in a deeply flawed system. I often think about what my mom would have had to say about all this. The truth is, I have no idea, but I do know that she would have been so furious. And then she would have gotten to work telling the truth, just as I try to, just as all of you do every day. While it's always an honor for me to take part in the presentation of the Toner Prize, this year I am especially honored to award it to a team of Washington Post journalists whose work stands as an exceptional example of how difficult, important, and resonant it is to tell the truth. Stephanie McCrumman arrived in Gadsden, Alabama, expecting to cover the religious supporters of then senatorial candidate Roy Moore. While conducting hours worth of interviews in an Applebee's, she was given a tip by a local that Moore had a known history of pursuing underage teenage girls during the late 70s and early 80s. At the time, he was an assistant district attorney in his early 30s. McCrumman, along with Beth Reinhardt and Alice Kreitz, began tirelessly pursuing this story. They eventually uncovered a disturbing pattern of behavior and the stories of 5 women, the youngest of whom was just 14 when Moore initiated sexual contact. In the middle of their investigation, McCrumman, Reinhardt, and Kreitz were approached by a woman named Jamie Phillips, who claimed Moore impregnated her when she was 15. Phillips turned out to be working undercover with Project Veritas, an organization that seeks to plant fake news in an effort to discredit honest coverage. The 3 were joined by reporters Sean Boberg and Aaron Davis, as well as videographers Dalton Bennett and Thomas LeGros, to expose the conservative group's efforts and ensure their work remained accurate. The reporters then returned to the work of getting the real survivors' stories out and getting them right. In reading these stories, I was struck by both the immense courage of the women who came forward and of the reporters who stayed in Alabama, checking and rechecking the facts, making sure their pieces were airtight because they knew the stakes. Stephanie McCrumman, Beth Reinhardt, and Alice Kreitz set the bar unbelievably high for what it means to be a female reporter, indeed, what it means to be a reporter, whatever one's gender. Every member of the team practiced the very values that they were defending against the Veritas effort to corrupt their coverage, an unbiased commitment to truth. As I begin to think about a career for myself, possibly one in journalism, I am so grateful to have this team's example of excellence. As my mother's daughter, to see what it takes to write and tell the truth in today's environment. For these reasons, I'm thrilled to award this year's Toner Prize for excellence in political reporting to Stephanie McCrumman, Beth Reinhardt, Alice Kreitz, Sean Boberg, Aaron Davis, Thomas LeGros, and Dalton Bennett of the Washington Post. Come to the stage. Respect.
Thank you so much. As you can see, it really was a cast of thousands here to put these stories together. And on behalf of all 7 of us, thank you so much to the Toner family, not just for giving us this award, but even having this award in the first place and all the hard work you put into the choreography of this evening. It's deeply appreciated. I also didn't have the privilege of knowing Robin Toner personally, but as everyone has said tonight, she seems like exactly the sort of person whose blessing you would hope to receive. As it says here, she was a reporter's reporter. She apparently had a legendary fact-checking process and was known for almost never getting a fact wrong. She was straightforward, she was transparent, and she wrote with the sense that she wasn't just writing about politics or policy, but that she was writing about people's lives, and she understood the stakes, as her daughter just said so well. So this is all so basic, but the basics are exactly what we all need to remember at this very strange moment that we're living in, this very toxic and precarious moment for journalists, the dark moment, as Senator Warner described, where Dan Balz's head can be on Marty's body or something like that. It's very strange, and it's all the more reason why we have to remember these standards. We have to get it right. We have to be fair. We have to be transparent. And so thank you so much to the Toner family for recognizing our efforts to uphold these basic standards. We want to thank, of course, as Ellen said, the great Marty Barron, our fearless leader, for creating the sort of newsroom where this kind of work is expected and supported and encouraged. And I just wanted to take one moment to make a sort of obvious point here, but I think it's important, which is that in the course of reporting these stories, Beth and I were in Alabama. We were talking to these women. We really never tried to persuade these women to go on the record per se. But what we did do was we constantly assured these women that we were going to handle these stories responsibly. We were going to be careful. And every time we were assuring them of this, I think we were both thanking our lucky stars that we had a fleet of editors behind us that were taking these stories just as seriously as we were, and that we knew they would never let us down. So thank you, editors, for all the attention. Even when it came to the strangest part of all this, which I consider sort of the caper part of this process. The stories had run, and then the effort turned to figuring out who this woman was who had approached us with this, what we turned out to be a fake story. And it turned out that we had to sort of turn our reporting efforts toward figuring out who this woman was. And it was very madcap and strange. And Beth was just completely just a cool cucumber, tough as nails when this woman approached her and suspected that, that she wasn't telling the truth. And, the effort went on to me meeting this woman at a Greek restaurant, and the video guys coming, and the gyros or gyros, and the beer, and it was all very strange. And then the video, and we had to tail this woman afterwards into a Target parking lot. It was very strange. It was a very bold effort, but ultimately, this too was old-fashioned journalism, and really it was a. Also, Aaron and Sean, staking out the offices of what turned out to be the Project Veritas offices. So thank you again for Marty for having the guts to pursue this to its end, and to all the editors for supporting this effort. I also just wanted to note quickly that it's interesting that none of us really are political reporters per se. as you may be able to tell. We're different kinds of reporters, but it's so great to be recognized with this prestigious political reporting award, and it's just a reminder that so often the great stories that end up impacting politics or revealing who a candidate is or saying something about where this country is going, those stories are out beyond Washington in the hinterlands and even in little places like Gadsden, Alabama, where there are people who are keeping secrets. And so finally, that leads me to acknowledging the most important people of all in all of this, which were the women who decided to come forward. I think it's really important to say these women were not part of any sort of movement. They were not on any bandwagon. They weren't gunning for any kind of political outcome. They didn't know each other. They didn't talk to each other. Each of these women had to decide whether to come forward on their own at 3 o'clock in the morning with whatever conversation they were having with themselves. And they did so without knowing whether they would be believed. They did so without knowing whether anyone would care about what they had to say, not knowing what the consequences might be to them personally, whether they might lose jobs or, something even worse. We're living in strange times. They did so knowing that the allegations they had were likely to upset some very powerful people, including the president who had endorsed this candidate and his very powerful allies who were in Alabama, on down to the power structures of Alabama. And it's worth remembering in this context who these women were when they were weighing these decisions. Lee Korfman worked at a payday loan place in Gadsden, single mom. Wendy Miller was a grandmother. Debbie Gibson lived in Florida. She had a thriving business that at this very moment that she was weighing all this, she was expanding her business into Alabama. Gina Richardson was a community college teacher. Becky Gray was a retired elementary school teacher who was advised by everyone she talked to not to talk to us. That would be a bad idea. She should just keep her mouth shut. There were others, but the point is these were not people with money or power or influence or any kind of protection, really. They were, each and every one of them, Beth and I these were people who were scared. They were very afraid. And also, it's worth remembering that these were people who were going to have to live with the consequences of their decision most of them in small town Alabama, in an area where this candidate had enormous support, including among their own childhood friends, their family, their neighbors. So if you think about it, they had every reason not to say anything. They had every reason not to come forward, including that we're at this very strange moment that everyone has talked about tonight, where people are telling them that journalists are not to be trusted, that they're going to take what you say and they're going to spin it this way or that way or God knows what. But they did come forward, and I just think it's worth really remembering how stunning that is, if you really think about it. That really, if you consider all the reasons they had not to come forward, that perhaps the reason they did was because they just wanted perhaps to satisfy their own conscience, and they wanted the truth out there. And then it wasn't even over. Once they came forward, many of these women were supported, but they were also viciously harassed and threatened. At least 2 of them decided to have extra police patrolling their neighborhoods. They faced a barrage of attempts to undermine their credibility, including, we now know because of Sean Boberg's story last week and Dalton Bennett's story, there was an attempt to bribe Lee Korfman's first attorney with $10,000 to turn on her and cast a cloud over what she was saying. So that was just a ferocious amount of stuff they had to consider and deal with, and they never backed down, so that's just pretty incredible to think about. So they were the story, and we were the journalists, and this all goes back to Robin Toner in a way, as she understood so well, and as we also understood, we could not afford to make one mistake in this story. Any mistake that we made, we knew was going to be just blown up and used to discredit these women, used to discredit our work. We tried to always remember, as Robin Toner did, that we were writing about people's lives, including, I should add, the candidate himself, whose reputation was also on the line and who deserved also to be treated fairly, who deserved our skepticism about the allegations initially, who deserved to know who his accusers were and exactly what they were accusing him of, and a chance to respond. We tried to remember also that, of course, our newspaper's reputation as a standard bearer of honest journalism was on the line, and in a way, the reputation of the mainstream, so-called mainstream media was on the line. Because that's the moment we're in right now. We're at a moment where a mistake by one of us, it really affects all of us journalists. So all that was very nerve-wracking, as you can imagine. It was very, very nerve-wracking, and so for all these reasons, it's especially nice to have this evening to be recognized, to relax, and have this award. Thank you so much, and we hope that Robin Toner would be proud. Thank you.
Great job.
Can you give it a go?
Let's take a picture together.
Picture?
Can we get a picture together?
Okay.
All right, 1, 2. Okay. There we go.
So congratulations to all of tonight's winners. Keep on doing all of that great journalism. The American public deserves it, they desire it, and they truly appreciate all of you for it. Before we wrap up, I'd like to thank a few more of our sponsors tonight that made all of this possible. The Walton Family Foundation and advisor Kiki McLean, the Knight Foundation and its VP, Jennifer Preston, Google and its Washington Communications Executive, Becca Rutkoff, Precision Strategies and its co-founder, Stephanie Cutter, Facebook, Bank of America, Robin's large and very loyal family, Bridget and Patrick McCall, her sisters Jane, Pat, and Gretchen, her brothers Chuck and Mark, and her children, obviously, we heard from them, two very intelligent, promising young children, Nora and Jacob, who will certainly carry on for their mother, and I'm sure she watched down on you all tonight, and she's very proud. It was a pleasure being here with all of you in this room, all of you just inspiring journalists. We all inspire each other. Just keep on keeping on the good fight. And I'm going to invite Jake back onto the stage for the benediction.
Renee has kindly thanked many of the people and institutions who've been essential to this program's success, but there are a few additional people I'd like to single out before we leave. Syracuse University and the Newhouse School have been amazing partners, and on behalf of my family, I want to thank Chancellor Syverud, his wife Dr. Ruth Chen, and Dean Branham in particular for all their sustaining help. Our prize award judges and many jurors have put in hard work and dedication in combing through our now hundreds of submissions. I want to repeat the thanks to John Chappell. You were helping us before I was old enough to know what that help was, and it means the world. I want to thank the senator and his senior staff. It was an honor to have him here tonight. And I want to thank the unsung heroes of this program, our office manager, Audrey Burian, this event's coordinator, Luke Miller, Charlotte Grimes, and of course, my dad. Finally, thank you. Finally, I want to thank all the reporters who took time out of their wild schedules to be with us tonight. As Nora and I both noted, this year's winner and honorable mentions did not just stand out for their great reporting, but for the visible change that reporting brought about. Unfortunately, this kind of impact doesn't always happen, no matter how great the reporting or how driven the reporter. As I've gotten older, I've come to admire more and more qualities of my mom, and one which feels particularly fitting now is her relentless optimism. As you know, my mom faced her fair share of challenges, professionally and personally. Yet through it all, she held firm to a belief that things were, by and large, headed in the right direction. I can't imagine the courage it took to maintain that belief, but I suspect after the last 2 years, many of you can. And so, I hope that all of you here tonight who report politics can find a way to hang on to your optimism, even if it's sometimes against the evidence. And on behalf of this program, on behalf of my family, and on behalf of my mom, I thank you for the sometimes thankless, always challenging, and ever important work you do. Good night and see you next year.